Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sling Method Injury-Free Running, all about the feet. So I want to make this presentation kind of just a general overall view of how what goes on at the foot impacts the rest of the body and how the rest of the body impacts the feet. Okay, so let's start off. A very, very simple thought. And I always think about the feet, how much of an amazing structure they are. But I bet most people really hardly ever think about their feet and what they have to do and what they have to go through and how they're influenced by the rest of the body and vice versa until and unless they get injured. So let's see what you know about feet. Now, we have 2 feet. Now, it sounds, well, yeah, of course we have 2 feet. But think about it. Neither one of them are in the middle. Okay, and when we run, our feet land either side of a very, very narrow width midline. Okay, so our midline left to right, our feet have to land very, very close to that midline. Okay, this is very important as this landing position relative to our left and right midline is what allows our feet to pronate and supinate really well. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why in the Sling method we train this position very specifically. Okay, fun facts. So each foot has 28 bones, 33 joints, 112 ligaments. There's some discrepancies depending on where you get the information from about this. But each foot has 13 extrinsic and 21 intrinsic muscles controlling all of the foot actions that we have. Now, each foot is divided into the forefoot, the midfoot, the rear foot. And the tibia bone, that's the lower leg bone, slides forward and backward over the talus bone that sits underneath it. The talus bone rocks side to side over the calcaneus bone that sits underneath it. And of course, the calcaneus bone is what kind of connects us to the ground, one of the bones. Now, these 2 motions, the forward, backward, and the side to side, they combine to create pronation and supination. Now, when we run, the forefoot and the rear foot actually do different movements. It's kind of like this twisting action of the foot. So the forefoot and the rear foot actually pronate and supinate at the same time. So it's not just an action of the whole foot moving as one, it's an action of the rear foot moving and then the forefoot moving into pronation and then supination. Okay? Now, this is what happens when we run. The center of mass goes down when we're on the ground, up when we're off the ground. So it's kind of like this wave action, okay? So what happens when we run? Our center of mass moves downwards from what we call mid-flight, when both feet are off the ground, to the lowest point in gait at mid-stance when one foot is on the ground and we're down and we're in this compression situation like we are here, okay? So the load actually increases from the microsecond that we land until mid-stance, and we're storing energy in the tendons and fascia because the muscles contract isometrically, and it's the fascia and the tendons which stretch and store the energy. Okay, and your feet deal with up to 10 times body weight of force in each step, thousands of times in every run. Let's think about it. It's a lot. So from mid-stance, where we're at our lowest point, we're actually coming up again. And that's when the tendons go from this stretched out position to a shortened position again, or a natural position again, and they give back. So imagine just like stretching. I've got a resistance band here. Imagine you stretch the tendon and it snaps back and it gives you the energy back. Okay, so that's what happens with the tendons and the fascia as well. You could think of it kind of like a tennis ball when the tennis ball hits the ground and compresses and then springs back. It's not quite like that. It's more like what I said with the resistance band, but you can think of it like that as well. And there are parts of the body, like in the feet, for example, that do actually compress and go down and then it springs back like that. So a tennis ball analogy is actually not a bad one. It's some parts of the body do one thing and some parts of the body do the other thing. So both things. All right, so this is what we see, or how our feet are actually made up. So there's the 4 arches of the foot. Okay, there's the start at the front. There's the anterior transverse arch. It goes across the front of the foot. There's the mid-tarsal transverse arch. So again, it goes across, but it's at the mid part of the foot. Then you've got the two long arches. You've got the medial longitudinal arch, and you've got the lateral longitudinal arch. The medial on the inside, the lateral on the outside. Okay, so these four arches. And you can think of the bone on top of the calcaneus, the talus bone, as a capstone, a keystone, capstone, whatever you want to call that, keystone or a capstone. I can't remember which one's the right word there. I think it's keystone. So yeah, they have this keystone top structure, and the muscles and the ligaments are actually holding that arch in an arch position like this, so that when the force is applied, it then squishes and comes back. Okay, so feet have lots of small ligaments which create stability and mobility. It's very important. Feet also have muscles holding the arches up from the inside. So imagine this is the inside, muscles holding the inside arches up, and then muscles holding the outside arches up, and they connect to the tibia. All right. So arches are extremely stable naturally. Think of a bridge that's going over a river. Extremely stable, okay? And we have that all-important keystone. I called it a capstone, and I should have called it keystone, making it extremely stable under loads, okay? Feet have the four arches, and we just talked about those. So we have the ligaments and the fascial layers holding all of these bones together, and it's actually a very mobile and highly stable structure all at the same time, because we have these soft tissues that are under tension, okay? Now, muscles support the arches from above on the inside, and they contract isometrically to allow the tendons and fascia to stretch. It's really important that we understand that. When we land, the muscles are already contracting, and then as we land, we apply the force and the muscles contract isometrically. That means they don't lengthen. Okay, so the muscle contracts, and it's the tendons, like I showed you before, the tendons which stretch and recoil, and that happens extremely quickly. All right, remember the loading is when we're coming from initial contact to mid stance, and it only happens for around about 10/100ths of a second. And then after mid stance is when those tendons recoil and produce the propulsion. Okay, so muscles above and on the outside do the same thing and support the arches as well as we roll through the foot through into pronation. Okay, so what is pronation? Pronation is the action of delaying impact. So if you imagine a bike or a car just running, slamming into a brick wall. Okay, the front of that car has a crumple zone. It all crumples. And the reason for that is to delay the impact. All right, remember it goes like boom, 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 boom as the car crumples. And that's kind of what pronation is. If we think of it in that way, we won't go too far wrong, because pronation is a way of delaying that the impact forces and spreading it over a longer period of time. And again, that's really important. Okay, and it's an inward rolling action of the ankle and the foot. It creates a longer period of time and spreads the collision with the ground over a longer period of time, thus lowering that impact spike. It's called an impact spike. Okay, so if it's a rapid impact spike, i.e. there's no crumple zone, and this is people who say they are a supinator. If you are a supinator, somebody who doesn't pronate very well, that means you're going to have a very rapid and high impact spike, which is not good. So the more we pronate, as I said there, pronation is a good thing, and it allows us to engage the gluteal muscle. It's very important because the big toe is directly connected to the glutes. Okay, so if you are not pronating, you are never going to get the glutes to fire and get you to drive that important part of hip extension. Okay, so pronation allows the tendons and the fascia to store energy and the supination muscles to rest. Very important again. Okay, now remember, pronation is good. Pronation gets us to the big toe. It saves energy. It makes us more economical runners, and it is injury resistant. Okay, without pronation, you will never get your glute to contract very well. Okay. Now, did you know, I kind of said this earlier on, the rear foot supinates and the forefoot pronates at the same time during toe off. So your foot needs to be highly mobile. Okay, so it does need to be mobile. And things like pulling those towels, the towel scrunch exercise, not good because it doesn't allow the foot to actually splay, and it doesn't train the foot to splay and then load through toe off. Okay, so supination is an outward rolling of the foot, and the foot has to have a range of motion. It has many joints, arches, muscles, and ligaments. It's not one bone. It should separate and twist. And it's a movement in a sequence, okay? So when the rear foot hits the ground or the midfoot hits the ground, it has to roll to the mid part of the foot to get to toe off, okay? And we have to finish the sequence through the big toe. So if we don't pronate the forefoot, we can't get to toe off, and we'll overload the lateral structure of the ankle and the knee. So people with things like IT band syndrome, peroneal tendonitis, issues with the feet, so mid foot issues that they might have, like stress fractures, anything like that, is more than likely going to be a problem with the foot not being mobile enough. Okay, if we have a mobile foot, we can create a rigid foot because the action of a mobile foot takes us to toe off. Okay, now in the Sling method, we train with all of our exercises with a 3-finger width because that is how wide our feet are when they encounter force when the foot is on the ground. We train all 4 arches of the foot because we train the foot to pronate and supinate. The Sling method is the only training system for runners which trains pronation and supination as it occurs in running. Very, very important, okay? So we have to have hip internal rotation. We have to have ankle dorsiflexion, as these are what occur in the running movement, all right? Now, there is a distinct line of force which the foot encounters when we run. So how does force move through the foot? How does the foot and the toe position affect it? How does an ankle sprain affect the foot? How does the hip affect it? How does the spine affect it? Lots of questions there. So let's take a look at how the force runs through the foot, and we'll come back to those questions. So the force goes from the outside to the inside, okay? So in early heel strike or an early strike of the foot will be where that red dot is, where the red line is, and it will progress to here, then to here, then to here. And then we get to big toe off. Okay. Now let's take it back to here. How does force move through the foot? We've just talked about that. How does foot and toe position affect it? Well, think about it. If you have to get to big toe off, imagine this is your big toe and you've got 5 toes, right? This is the outside. There'll be an extra one here. All right. Imagine this is your big toe. If your foot is pointing straight, you will get to big toe off. If your foot is pointing outwards and the line of force is going this way, what you're going to do is you're going to go through the arch of your foot, the medial arch of your foot, what we all know as the arch, and you're going to get a problem because you're not going to encounter the big toe in this position. It's pointing out over here, right? So you're never going to find that big toe when it comes to the force going straight, all right, or going to the inside of the foot like it does here, yeah? All right, if the foot's pointing outwards, that's going to go through the arch, okay? So if the foot is pointing out or the big toe is leaning over away from the midline, you'll probably end up with a bunion, and then you won't get to toe off because you'll just collapse the foot or it will roll through the medial arch, okay? How does an ankle sprain affect how the foot moves? Well, if you've sprained an ankle, your peroneals are likely going to be, pretty useless, and you won't pronate because those muscles have been affected, the fascia has been affected, the communication has all been affected, so it won't pronate well. If your peroneals are in a sprained situation, and you don't just fix a sprain, you don't fix the movement after you've recovered or the sprain has healed, that doesn't mean that your movement is now perfect again. It just means that you've healed what was broken, right? So you'll be more likely to over supinate or not pronate well. Okay. How does the hip affect it? Well, if we stand with externally rotated hips, i.e. feet pointing out, you are not going to pronate because you don't internally rotate the hip well. How does the spine affect it? Well, if I don't rotate my body, my shoulders, my spine freely, I'm not going to pronate very well because all of these things affect how our feet move. Okay. All right. So feet which point out are a big issue for runners. Okay, there's 3 types of feet in terms of position. Feet which point out, feet which point straight, feet which point inwards. And inward pointing feet are very rare. Rarely find people with inwardly pointing feet. Okay. So anyway, force through it from our center of mass moves through the foot and ends up wherever the big toe should be. When the feet point out, the force travels through that medial longitudinal arch and doesn't make it to the big toe. The big toe is disconnected. Okay. When the feet point outward, it's almost impossible to have the muscle strength to control the force of the twisting tibia. Okay. So when the foot is pointing outwards, what happens is the tibia just rolls inwards. Okay. And that needs to be controlled by a foot that's pointing straight ahead. And the big toe and all of the muscles, they simply cannot support a position very well where the feet are pointing out. This is why when people who run have feet pointing out and they point out the whole way through the gait cycle, i.e. they never turn back in, tendons and fascia will suffer. Okay. When we run, our muscles contract according to the load placed on joints. Okay. We don't choose what muscles to contract. Okay, it's all governed by reflexes and proprioceptive sensors within the joints and within the muscles as well. So our muscles contract in accordance to what demand is placed on the joints. Okay, it's very important. So imagine if your muscles didn't produce more force by reflexes sensing that demand. Right, you would have to decide, how much force? How much do I have to contract this muscle and then this muscle and then this muscle? There's no possible way that you could react that fast. And let's be honest, running would not be enjoyable. All right. So we know that it's all controlled by these sensors, these proprioceptive sensors and reflexes. All right. And you're not controlling that. So when people say, I could just try to correct it while I'm running. No, you can't. You can't. You might be able to make a very small change for maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but you'll switch off after that. Okay. We don't think about contracting muscles. We just run. We don't think about how fast or how forceful a contraction needs to be. It's just all controlled by the nervous system. And let's be honest, nervous system will do a better job than we could do consciously, right? The only thing that we consciously think about when we run, or the only things, are how fast do we want to run? How far do we want to run? The terrain that we're running on, the temperature, the humidity, and the hydration and the fueling. Those are really the key things. You're not thinking about how you're moving, about which muscles to contract. It's all done automatically. Okay? So the nerves in the feet communicate with the rest of the body via the fascial system. The fascial system is the nervous system. It's full, it's innervated with these nerves. And when fascia is loaded, it directly communicates with the muscles to contract, and it also has smooth muscle cells within it. Okay? Now, as I said earlier on, your big toe, the hallux, as it's called, is directly connected to your glute max. Okay, and your glute max attaches to the pelvis and controls some of this posterior tilt action. Not all of it, but some of it. And at the right place at the right time. So as we go over our big toe and into toe off, that would be the cue for the glute to contract and tilt the pelvis and drive you forwards. Okay, now if you don't have access to this big toe extension, i.e. your big toe is damaged, and that's really what that's showing you, big toe is damaged, means that your glute max is also damaged because the communication between the two is lost. Okay, if you can't get there, it's just not going to happen. So it's like a chicken and egg scenario. They are very much interconnected. The dysfunction in one will generally lead to dysfunction in the other, which will then knock on to the other again. So you'll get this consistent and constant and continuous knock-on effect. So if the big toe is damaged, i.e. it's pointing the wrong way or the feet are pointing outwards, or you have hallux rigidus, hallux limitus in the big toe, where you can't extend the big toe or it's stuck rock solid, you're going to have a problem. And these things they can be improved upon. They can be maybe not 100% fixed, but they can be improved on massively by doing the right work. And that's what we do. We approach the problem by addressing both issues. Okay. It doesn't make sense not to do that. Why would you not do that? You just hit all birds with one stone at the same time. Okay. Now, gait is about what we call coupled movements. And what coupled movements are, they're movements that go together. They create stability, control, power, and they spread the load efficiently to all the areas of the body. Okay. So keep these coupled movements, it's a sequence. All right. That's why I got these cards like this, the 10 Jack Queen King Ace. So it's a sequence. It's a flowing sequence. Okay. Pronation is dorsiflexion. I'm going to get a couple of pens here and show you. So imagine this is your tibia bone, and this is where it goes over the ankle. Dorsiflexion is where the tibia rocks forwards. Now, if you are limited in this dorsiflexion, you're not going to pronate very well. Dorsiflexion is also, if I turn it this way, imagine the foot is pointing at you. As you dorsiflex, it must internally rotate. Now, the big toe is what protects the tibia from rolling too far. If the big toe presses down at the right place at the right time, when the tibia rocks forwards, it protects you from too much overpronation, right? So we need to get dorsiflexion, internal rotation, and also importantly, we need to get knee flexion. Okay, pronation requires forefoot splay. It requires the toes to splay. It requires hip flexion. It requires the knee to go inward towards the big toe. Pronation requires trunk rotation. Your trunk is your torso. It requires rotation of the trunk to take advantage of the hip angles. Okay. It requires spinal lateral flexion and also hip joint abduction. Okay, so as we dorsiflex at the ankle, we bend at the knee, we flex at the hip, we get the other side of the pelvis to go up relative. Okay, so if one side goes down, your stance leg side goes down, then the other side is going up relative. Okay, and that is the hip abduction that we need, the hip joint abduction. But it's not by taking the femur away from the midline. It's not because you're doing this, right? It's because you're doing this with you're bending and your hip comes up. Okay, your pelvis comes up. All right. Okay. So an outward pointing foot can create hallux valgus, and a bunion will likely follow. A bunion is just a bony adaptation to a problem. And it's not really a good problem, but it's an adaptation the body makes. Now, remember, that line of force that has to go through the foot, a bony adaptation, is what's going to happen if the foot is pointing outwards or the toes are restricted and the big toe is pointing away from the midline. Okay, so we get a bunion. Hallux limitus, hallux rigidus can be caused by poorly fitting footwear, high heels, restrictive socks, and women are more prone to these issues. Okay, so check your footwear. Be careful of footwear that is very, very restrictive. Okay, anything like elasticated socks are going to pull the toes from being like this to being like this. That's going to restrict it. Okay. So, have you ever seen these? Your feet rely on your toes to create tension in the tissues underneath. Because as you roll over the foot, these toes need to splay. Now, remember I said about towel scrunching exercises are not good because they don't teach us how to load the toes in their splayed position. Now, in every single total training package, that's the package that I supply, that the Sling method supplies to our runners, we give 2 sets of these toe spreaders, these silicone toe spreaders, and they encourage toe splay. They sit in between your toes and they encourage toe splay. This is of the highest importance. Foot function is huge, and that's why we work on it so much. Now remember, as we land, we may encounter up to 500 pounds of force before we get to the lowest point of gait where force is at the highest. Okay. Now remember, we always land with our foot in front. Okay, force shifts from the rear foot to the forefoot during early to mid stance. We need to be super strong in loading the midfoot. We must be super strong loading the midfoot. Okay, that's why everything that we do in the sling method is all about loading that forefoot, because we have to be strong there. All right, don't get that with squats. All right, so at mid stance is where we are at the lowest point. Max force is reached here, and we are at maximal toe splay, ready to take the load into the forefoot. The plantar fascia, the Achilles tendon, the patella tendon, the IT band are at full load. So train that position. That's what we do, right? We train this position. Now, at this point at mid stance, the ankle has reached full dorsiflexion. The tibia has rolled all the way forwards as far as it will go, and it's now pulling on all those soft tissues. Okay, and it pulls them into length so that they can then load as they stretch, and then the stretch gives back its energy when we get to toe off. So the heel is ready to lift, the ankle is ready to supinate and plantar flex. So the amount of vertical force here is less at the toe off position. Look how far in front of the foot the head is and the rest of the body is. Okay, vertical force here is less because we've started going up again. We move forwards and upwards. So at this point, the center of mass is ahead of the toes, the knee, the feet are at full leverage. The soleus muscle, the hamstrings, they're all contracted isometrically and starting to contract concentrically to support the upper body. And the forefoot is taking a huge load. It's also extremely vulnerable. So if you are not strong in this position, your brain and your nervous system won't allow you to go there. So think of those towel scrunching exercises. They're not training you to get to this position. They're not training you to get to this position on screen. Okay. So this is a position that we must get into and train. The femur is vertical. You can see how that femur is vertical. That allows horizontal force to be produced, which thrusts you forwards. Now, how are you going to get into this position if you have a hallux rigidus or a hallux limitus in the big toe? You won't. Okay. So this is where the big toe needs to get you into the end stance phase of gait. Okay, so the hallux is the big toe. If we aren't getting the hallux, we're missing those nerves, those reflexes. A happy big toe is one that moves well, doesn't deviate away from the midline and connects with the ground. But we don't just say, press the big toe down. No, because we have to dorsiflex, internally rotate, and then load in foot splay and toe splay to get to the hallux. Just simply saying, oh, press the big toe down, press the big toe down, press the big toe down does not work. That does not work. Okay? So I know some people will have heard from their physical therapist, yeah, work on pressing the big toe down. Doesn't matter. If you never get there because you don't pronate, doesn't matter. It's never going to happen. Okay? If the feet are pointing outwards, it's never going to happen. If your feet are restricted, it's never going to happen because your brain won't let you go there. All right. So let's do a little thing here. Let's get you to stand up with your feet 3 finger width apart. Okay. So you're going to stand up 3 finger width apart on your big toe ball joints. That's the where we would have a bunion if we had a bunion. Okay. Now, without adjusting anything, without changing anything, lift 1 foot up. Okay, lift 1 foot up off the ground. Okay. What happens? What happens? You lost your balance, right? Okay, because your feet are either side of your midline. Doesn't matter which foot you take off the ground. If you stand in that position and you take 1 foot off the ground, you will fall that way. Okay? Now, I want you to do this. You're going to stand up with your feet 3 finger width. You are going to wind up into the position that you see me in on the screen. Okay? So I went from being like this to being like this. And what you'll probably feel is that your big toe naturally presses down. And the reason for that is because you are rotating and you're bringing your knee up towards the midline. And when you do that, you take advantage of this knee to hip angle. That's called a Q angle or quadricep angle. You take advantage of that. You also take advantage of your pronation action. And remember, pronation gets you to your big toe. Okay, try it. Try it on both legs. So you stand there 3-finger width between your big toe ball joints. That's where, if you had a bunion, that's where it would be. That's the big toe ball joint. And then just wind up. And then wind up. You don't fall over. Okay, and the reason for that is because when you rotate your spine and you drive the pelvis into this abduction and you drive the femur into adduction and internal rotation, you get to pronation. It's a very stable position because from a stable position, we then come up to supination. That's the heel, the rear foot, the heel coming up, and it's a super powerful position. And you can't create power from a position of no stability. So if you're not pronating, you're not stable and you can't supinate. Simple as that. Okay? So let's just go back. It's a stable position. It's a fascially wound position. It's a controlled position. It takes advantage of the joint angles, like I said, to get to pronation. How does it work? Well, the entire body moves by creating angles through the spine, the hips, the feet. The spine is not straight. Your spine is not like this. It's like this. It's a curved spine. And when a curved spine rotates, it generates force because it naturally moves that way. And the rotational torque is rotation, is transferred through the pelvis, then it's transferred to the legs, then it's transferred to the feet, and through the feet is where it goes into the ground, and that is what gets you the ground reaction force to then push you off the ground. Now you might be thinking, oh, ground reaction force, that sounds scary. No, it's not. Imagine running if you're on the moon with no gravity. You'll never land. You'll never hit the ground. We need ground reaction force. We need gravity. Okay? It then starts all over again. So when the foot is coming up, you've already started to wind the other way. Now, if you think I'm completely crazy, it's like, no, we need to keep the spine stiff. Well, here's 3 of the best runners of all time. Okay, this is Kelvin Kiptum, the current world record holder, who unfortunately died last year. Look at the position of his shoulders. Look at where his head is. It's directly over his foot. Chiptagai from Uganda, same position. Shoulder down, head over foot. So right shoulder down in right leg stance phase. Right shoulder down in right leg stance phase. You can see this. Arthur Lydiard. Some of you might know of Arthur Lydiard, one of the most famous coaches of all time. Lydiard Coaching Academy. Same position. Right shoulder down during right foot stance phase. And you can see with his foot that he's pronating towards the big toe. Okay, look at the position. Head is further than the foot. Slightly different angle of the camera here, but you see what I'm saying. Okay. So why don't you fall over when you run? Well, it's simple. It's because your brain and your nervous system contracts muscles to stop you from falling over. Also, your center of mass is in forward motion when you're running. So it's only 1/4 of a second of balance. It's not really balance. It's driving force in a direction. Okay, think about it. When you run, you drive force this way, then you drive force this way, then you drive force this way, then this way, then this way, then this way. Then 3 times per second. It changes roughly. Okay. Now the foot is at the end of a long line of movements. It is at the mercy of everything above it. Okay. The foot is at the end of the leg, and it's like the end of a whip after someone's cracked a whip. And the speed and the power of the small movements that are sent through the body end up at the foot. Okay, so imagine this, a whip. It's a whipping effect, okay? It's a whipping effect, all right? So the foot is the fastest moving of all body parts. So think about it. Your foot's come off the ground and it's still going backwards as you're going forwards. Then it has to catch you up, overtake you, and land in front of you. Think of how fast it has to move, twice the speed. So it has to catch you up, overtake you, and then be pulled back before it lands. So it moves super fast, okay? To maintain a consistent speed, running speed, your foot must land at the same speed as the body is moving, but in the opposite direction. So as your foot lands, it should be being pulled backwards. So that's landing on a backward traveling leg. So as your foot swings forwards, and then it comes and it lands on a backward traveling leg, if it hits the ground and you're accelerating, it will be landing at a faster speed, thus propelling you to a faster speed, a faster locomotion speed. But if you're running at a consistent speed, give or take minor fluctuations, then your foot needs to be landing on a backward traveling leg at the same speed as your velocity, as your locomotive speed, as speed moving forwards, but in the opposite direction. All right? Hope that makes sense. So your feet, they're not just your foundation, they are your connection to the rest of your body and the first spring within your body. They are the fastest moving part of your body and under huge load in every step you take. They're a massive neurological influence to how the rest of your body moves when running. And your feet are generally under-recognized, and they are rarely considered as a body part which needs training in runners. And that's really crazy when you think about it. All right? And that's why the Sling method does what it does. So think about it. All right, we train all of these things. You've probably never heard of most of what I've just gone through here. So just think about that. You've probably never heard of it. It doesn't mean I'm wrong. It doesn't mean I'm talking nonsense. I'm bringing things for you to consider. And I've worked with thousands of runners, and I've taken them through the Sling Method course, the Runners Rehab 9-week course, and it's mind-blowing, that course, how much they get out of it. And they continue to get out of it month after month, year after year, because there is so much there. Now, of course, there's no exam, there's no test at the end of it. You don't need to know everything. That doesn't mean that having it there is not beneficial. It's not super beneficial, because it can really, really give you tons of things to work on and just keep that information flowing. And, what you'll do throughout this course is you'll be making all these connections. All these different connections. Oh, yeah, I got that. That was a total light bulb moment. And I hear this a lot. That was a light bulb moment. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I really made the connection of things that you were saying there. All right. Now, I hope that was helpful. I hope there wasn't too much information in one go, but I wanted to kind of give you a real overview of how the foot functions and how the foot kind of is a big part of the overall system of the body, and how having feet that are not in the right position, i.e. they point out, or we have big toe that's pointing outwards, whatever, it affects the rest of your body. Also, how injuries that you might have had, like an ankle sprain, we don't think of ankle sprains as being a big deal, but they are a really big deal when it comes to how our feet function. Okay. A lot of things to think about. Get the Runners Rehab 9-week course. It will be an absolute game changer, life changer for your running. And I am there to help you to get the most out of it. I give so much help and advice and information within this private accountability support group. It's crazy how much I help people there. So you're not on your own. It's a 9-week educational course, and it's going to be life-changing for you and your running. All right. Any questions, of course, you're always welcome to post into the groups. And there we go. Foot function for gait. Bye.